My sister sent me a wedding gift list asking for an apartment, a car, and designer bags. I told her I wasn't buying any of it. She exploded and screamed, "Then don't even come." So I didn't, and what happened next had the entire family blaming her. I, 32M, received the email on a Tuesday morning while sitting at my desk, halfway through my second coffee. The subject line read, "Wedding Gift Registry. Please review ASAP." I assumed it would be a normal registry, maybe some kitchen appliances, bedding, the usual stuff couples ask for. I was wrong. The attachment opened to reveal a meticulously formatted spreadsheet. My sister had categorized her requests by priority level. Priority 1 included a 2-bedroom apartment in the downtown area, valued at roughly $400,000. Priority 2 listed a luxury sedan, make and model specified. Priority 3 had an entire column of designer handbags, each with links to the exact style and color she wanted. The spreadsheet continued for 3 pages. I sat there staring at my screen, convinced this had to be some kind of joke. My sister had always been demanding, sure, but this crossed every reasonable boundary. I scrolled to the bottom where she'd added a note explaining that as her only sibling, she expected me to contribute significantly to her new life. She mentioned that I made good money in tech and had no wife or kids to support, so I could afford to be generous. The entitlement radiated through every carefully chosen word. I called her immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and cheerful. I asked her if she was serious about the list. She told me of course she was serious, that she'd spent weeks putting it together. I pointed out that she was asking for nearly $500,000 in gifts. She laughed and said that was what family did for each other, that she'd do the same for me if I ever got married, though her tone suggested she doubted that would happen. I felt my jaw tighten. I told her I wasn't buying any of it. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Then she asked me to repeat what I'd just said. I did, speaking slowly and clearly. I explained that I'd be happy to buy something reasonable from a normal registry, but I wasn't financing her entire post-wedding lifestyle. That's when she lost it. Her voice went from confused to furious in an instant. She screamed that I was selfish, that I'd always been jealous of her, that I couldn't stand to see her happy. I tried to interject, but she kept going, her voice getting higher and more shrill. Then she delivered the ultimatum. If I wasn't going to contribute properly, then I shouldn't even bother coming to the wedding. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. Then I told her fine, I wouldn't come. I hung up before she could respond. The fallout was immediate. Within an hour, my mother called. She was crying, asking what had happened between my sister and me. I explained the situation calmly, even emailing her the spreadsheet so she could see it herself. There was a long pause after I sent it. Then Mom said she'd talk to my sister and call me back. She sounded tired. My father called next. He was more direct, asking if I'd really told my sister I wasn't coming to her wedding. I confirmed that I had, after she'd uninvited me for not wanting to buy her an apartment. He sighed deeply and said he'd handle it. I knew that meant he'd try to smooth things over, play mediator like he always did. But I was done being managed. My sister sent a flurry of text messages over the next few days. They ranged from angry to manipulative to occasionally apologetic, though the apologies always came with conditions. She'd say she was sorry I felt hurt, but that I needed to understand her perspective. She was starting a new life and needed support. Her fiancé came from money and his family would judge her if she didn't have nice things. Every message was an exercise in justification, never actual accountability. I didn't respond to any of them. 2 weeks before the wedding, my mother called again. She asked if I'd reconsider attending. My sister had apparently been having meltdowns, crying about how her only brother was abandoning her on the most important day of her life. Mom's voice was pleading. She said the family needed to stick together, that I was making things harder for everyone. I asked her if she'd seen the registry list. She admitted she had. I asked if she thought it was reasonable. She went quiet, then said that wasn't the point. But it was the point. It was exactly the point. I told Mom I loved her, but I wasn't going to reward my sister's behavior by pretending it was acceptable. If she wanted me at her wedding, she knew what she needed to do. Mom sighed and said she understood, even though I could tell she didn't. The wedding came and went. I spent that Saturday hiking in the mountains, my phone turned off, enjoying the silence. When I turned it back on that evening, I had 63 notifications. Most were from family members, some disappointed, others outright angry. A few cousins had sent messages of support, saying they'd seen the registry and thought my sister had lost her mind. Those messages felt like small victories. But the most interesting notification was from my father. He'd sent a single text asking me to call him when I had a chance. His tone seemed different, less diplomatic than usual. I called him Sunday morning. He answered immediately and asked if I was sitting down. That's never a good sign. He then told me what had happened at the wedding reception. My sister had apparently decided to make a speech. Weddings often have speeches, but this wasn't the typical thank you for coming variety. She'd taken the microphone during dinner and launched into a tirade about me. She told the entire reception that her brother had refused to support her, that I'd chosen money over family, that I was selfish and cold-hearted. She said she'd asked for a few simple gifts and I'd rejected her out of spite. The room had gone silent. Then my aunt, my father's sister, stood up. She was a lawyer, sharp as a knife, and took no nonsense from anyone. She asked my sister to clarify what exactly she'd asked for. My sister, probably feeling confident with the microphone and audience, said she'd simply requested some household items and a car. My aunt pulled out her phone. She'd received the same registry list because my sister had sent it to every family member with money. My aunt asked if a $400,000 apartment counted as a household item. She read the list aloud to the entire reception. Every single item, every price tag, every entitled demand. The atmosphere shifted immediately. My father said you could feel it, the way the room turned. Guests started whispering. My sister's face went red, then white. She tried to grab the microphone back, but my aunt wasn't finished. She said that what my sister was doing wasn't asking for gifts. It was financial extortion dressed up in wedding paper. She said I had every right to refuse and every right not to attend. My sister's new mother-in-law, who came from the old money family my sister was so desperate to impress, apparently stood up and left. Just walked straight out of the reception. Her husband and several other family members followed. My father said it was like watching dominoes fall. The groom tried to salvage things, but the damage was catastrophic. Half the reception left within the next hour. My sister locked herself in the bridal suite and refused to come out. The wedding she'd planned so meticulously, the one she demanded hundreds of thousands in gifts for, imploded. My father told me all this in a quiet, measured tone. Then he said he was sorry. He apologized for not backing me up sooner, for trying to keep the peace instead of addressing my sister's behavior. He said he'd enabled her for too long, and watching her meltdown at her own wedding had shown him exactly where that path led. I didn't feel victorious hearing this. Honestly, I felt sad. This was my sister, someone I'd grown up with, and she destroyed her own wedding because she couldn't control her greed and entitlement. Update 1. The week after the wedding was chaos. My sister called me exactly once, and it was the most bizarre conversation I've ever had. She was sobbing, barely coherent, asking why I'd ruined her wedding. I reminded her that I hadn't even attended. She screamed that it was my fault anyway, that if I'd just bought what she'd asked for, none of this would have happened. Her logic was so twisted, I couldn't even formulate a response. I told her I hoped she'd find some perspective eventually, and ended the call. Her husband called me 2 days later. That conversation was different. He sounded exhausted and apologetic. He said he hadn't known about the registry list until the wedding, that my sister had handled all of that herself. He'd assumed she was creating a normal gift registry. When my aunt read it aloud at the reception, he'd been as shocked as everyone else. He told me his mother had been horrified. She'd spent decades building the family's reputation on discretion and propriety, and my sister's public display had embarrassed her deeply. His parents were now questioning the entire marriage, wondering what else my sister might have hidden or lied about. He sounded like a man who'd woken up to find himself in a life he didn't recognize. I felt some sympathy for him, but not much. He'd chosen to marry her, and at some point, he must have seen signs of this behavior. Still, I told him I bore him no ill will and wished him luck. He thanked me and hung up. My mother continued her campaign to get me to reconcile with my sister. She'd call every few days with updates I didn't ask for. My sister was devastated. My sister wasn't eating. My sister couldn't understand why everyone was so upset with her. Each call was another variation of the same theme. I needed to be the bigger person and reach out. I finally told Mom that being the bigger person didn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. It didn't mean pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. My sister had created this situation entirely on her own, and she needed to face the consequences. Mom went quiet, then said she'd raised me better than this. I told her she'd raised me to have boundaries and self-respect, and that's exactly what I was doing. 3 weeks after the wedding, my aunt invited me to dinner. We met at an upscale steakhouse downtown. She ordered us both drinks and told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything. She said most people would have caved under the family pressure, but I'd stood firm. She also told me something I hadn't known. My sister had sent that same registry to 12 different family members, each with a personalized note about how much she was counting on them specifically. My aunt had compared notes with other relatives. My sister had told each person they were her favorite, that she had a special bond with them, that she knew they'd come through for her. It was a coordinated manipulation campaign. Some relatives had actually pooled money together before the wedding, planning to buy her the car. They'd backed out after the reception incident and were now donating that money to charity instead. The extent of my sister's scheming was honestly impressive in its audacity. She'd treated her wedding like a business venture, maximizing potential returns through emotional manipulation and family obligation. And it had backfired spectacularly. Update 2. 2 months after the wedding, my sister's marriage was already showing cracks. My father mentioned during one of our now weekly calls that her husband had moved into their guest room. The honeymoon period, such as it was, had lasted approximately 6 weeks. The issue, according to Dad, was that my sister couldn't let go of the wedding disaster. She'd become obsessed with it, spending hours online reading about what she called her ruined special day. She'd started a private blog detailing her side of the story, painting herself as the victim of a cruel and unsupportive family. Someone had found the blog and shared it in our family group chat. It was delusional, rewriting history to make her demands seem reasonable and everyone else's reactions seem extreme. Her husband's family had completely frozen her out. They included him in family gatherings, but made it clear she wasn't welcome. He was apparently caught between his wife and his family, and the stress was destroying him. My father had spoken with him a few times, and the guy sounded like he was barely holding it together. Part of me wondered if I should reach out to my sister, try to talk some sense into her. But I knew it wouldn't work. She'd have to want to change, to see her role in all this, and she was nowhere near that point. She was still fully committed to being the wronged party. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents had actually improved. My father and I talked more than we had in years. He'd started pushing back on my sister's behavior, refusing to enable her victim narrative. My mother was slower to come around, but even she'd stopped asking me to apologize. She'd seen the blog, read my sister's twisted version of events, and something in it had finally clicked for her. Then came the bombshell. For months after the wedding, my sister filed for divorce. She claimed irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. Her husband didn't contest it. He just wanted out, wanted to salvage what he could of his life and his family relationships. My sister moved back in with our parents. She was 30 years old, divorced after 4 months of marriage, and angrier than ever. She blamed everyone but herself. Me for not coming to the wedding, my aunt for exposing her registry, her ex-husband for being weak, his family for being judgmental. The list went on. I visited my parents for dinner one evening, timing it for when I knew my sister would be out. My mother looked older somehow, worn down by the constant drama. She told me she didn't know what to do anymore. Every conversation with my sister turned into an argument. Every attempt to help was rejected. My mother was watching her daughter self-destruct and felt powerless to stop it. I suggested therapy. Mom said my sister refused, insisted she didn't need it, that everyone else needed to change their perspectives. Classic. Dad pulled me aside before I left that evening. He told me he was proud of me for standing my ground. He said he'd learned something important from watching this whole situation unfold. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their actions. Enabling my sister had done her no favors. It had only delayed her reckoning with reality. Update 3. 6 months post-wedding, things finally started to shift. My sister got a job, her first real one in years. She'd previously done some freelance work, but nothing consistent. Our parents had subsidized her lifestyle, something I'd never fully realized until the wedding drama forced everything into the open. The job was in retail management, nothing glamorous, but it was honest work with a steady paycheck. I heard about it from my mother, who sounded cautiously hopeful. Maybe having to support herself would teach my sister some perspective. I didn't hear from my sister directly until about a month after she started working. She sent me a text message asking if we could meet for coffee. No explanation, just the request. I debated ignoring it, but decided to hear her out. We met at a neutral location, a cafe neither of us frequented. She looked different, tired, less polished than usual. She ordered a regular coffee, no fancy drink. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before she told me she wanted to apologize. I waited, skeptical. She said she'd been reflecting a lot lately, especially since starting her job. Being responsible for her own bills, her own life, had given her perspective she'd lacked before. She admitted the registry had been ridiculous, that she'd been caught up in trying to impress people who didn't matter. She said she understood why I'd refused to come to the wedding. I listened carefully, watching her face for signs of manipulation. But she seemed genuine, defeated even. I told her I appreciated the apology and that I hoped she meant it. She said she did, that she was trying to figure out who she was without the entitlement and expectations she'd built her identity around. We didn't hug or have some big reconciliation moment, but we finished our coffee and agreed to stay in touch. Baby steps. Over the following weeks, my sister and I texted occasionally. Nothing deep, just casual check-ins. She told me about her job, the difficult customers, the long hours. She sounded almost normal, like a regular person dealing with regular problems, instead of someone constantly chasing status and validation. My parents were relieved. Mom cried when I told her my sister and I were talking again. Dad just smiled and nodded, that knowing look on his face that said he'd hoped this would happen eventually. The real test came during the holidays. The whole family gathered at my parents' house for the first time since the wedding. My sister and I were civil, even friendly. She didn't make demands or create drama. She helped with dinner, talked to relatives, acted like a functioning adult. My aunt pulled me aside at one point and asked how I felt about everything. I told her honestly, cautiously optimistic. My sister seemed to be making genuine changes, but trust would take time to rebuild. My aunt nodded approvingly and told me that was wise. Looking back on everything, I realized the wedding disaster was probably the best thing that could have happened to my sister. It was a brutal wake-up call, but she'd needed it. Years of entitlement and enabling had created a monster, and only hitting rock bottom had given her the chance to rebuild as someone better. I'm not naive enough to think everything is perfect now. My sister still has moments where the old entitlement creeps back in, where she complains about not having the luxury lifestyle she'd envisioned. But she catches herself now, acknowledges it, tries to do better. As for me, I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it costs you in the short term, is always worth it. I could have bought my sister something from that ridiculous registry, shown up to the wedding, kept the peace. But it would have only enabled her further, delayed this necessary reckoning. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Sometimes you have to let people fail so they can learn to succeed. And sometimes revenge isn't about actively hurting someone. It's about refusing to participate in their self-destruction and letting natural consequences do the work for you. My sister's wedding imploded because of her own actions, not mine. I just refused to be complicit. And in the end, that refusal saved our relationship instead of destroying it, because it forced her to confront who she'd become and decide to be better. The family still talks about that wedding sometimes, usually in hushed tones with meaningful looks. It's become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when entitlement goes unchecked. And whenever my sister hears it brought up, she doesn't get defensive anymore. She just looks embarrassed and changes the subject. That, more than any apology, tells me she's really changed.